So hello everyone, good afternoon. I hope that you are doing well wherever you are in quarantine. And I hope that you're finding plenty of time to study. Today we're going to talk about cultural linguistics and pragmatics. So up until now we've mainly focused on metaphors, on cultural metaphors. But you may remember in the first lessons we talked about how cultural conceptualizations can be broken down into cultural schemas, cultural categories, and cultural metaphors. So until now we focused mainly on metaphors, but today we're going to look a little bit more closely at cultural schemas and specifically at pragmatic schemas. So cultural conceptualizations have various practical instantiations, as is demonstrated here in this chart, which you may remember from one of the first lectures. And one of these instantiations is language. So pragmatic schemas are one of the branches of language, one of the instantiations of language. Okay, so pragmatic cultural schemas consist of a four-tier hierarchy, as you can see here in this triangle. And I will post this PowerPoint on the class link so you can go back later and look at it more closely. All right, so this four-tier hierarchy starts at the bottom with a pragmatic schema, then a speech act, then a pragmeme, and then finally a pract. And as is indicated by the name, pract is the most practical manifestation of these schemas, of these cultural conceptualizations. Okay? So pragmemes are general situational prototypes of pragmatic acts that are capable of being executed in a particular situation or a cluster of situations. So as we'll see, they can be used in many different contexts in life. And practs refer to particular realizations or instantiations of pragmemes. So practs are the actual words that are spoken in those particular situations, in those particular contexts. And pragmemes are often closely linked with certain cultural assumptions and expectations, as we will see concretely in our examples. So, cultural schemas that provide a basis for pragmatic meanings are pragmatic schemas. And our goal is to try to develop a framework for examining the relationship between cultural schemas and pragmatic devices. Okay, so what we're going to do is look at 4 examples of pragmemes and practs from Persian, and also look at 1 example from Hungarian and 1 example from American English. So the 4 examples that we're going to look at from Persian include the schema of shekaste nafsi, which is associated with modesty, with their cultural understanding, their cultural conceptualization of modesty. Then sharmandagi, which is associated with their cultural conceptualization of being ashamed. Then rudar bayasti, which is their cultural conceptualization of respectful distance, so respect for authority, for those in a perceived higher position. And then finally, Taorof, which is their cultural conceptualization associated with giving and accepting invitations, and also just with etiquette in general. And then the cultural schema that we're going to look at from Hungarian is the phrase ne haragudj, and basically everything that is associated with it. And in American English, we're going to look at the pragmatic schema associated with the phrase my bad. Okay, so our first example from Iranian, the pragmatic schema of shekaste nafsi, which, as I said, is associated with the cultural conceptualization of modesty. So if we look at a specific manifestation of this schema, it can come into play in any speech act where somebody is responding to a compliment on an achievement. And in this case, the pragmeme, so the cultural expectation, which is associated with this schema, would dictate in this case that the person reassign the compliment to the complimenter. So this might result in the following practice. I owe this achievement entirely to you. This is the result of your excellent teaching. Okay, so this is a concept that might not be totally familiar to those of us from Western cultures. When somebody pays us a compliment, many times we might try to play it down, or we might simply thank the person, but it's definitely not very common to turn the compliment around and say that actually you are the one who is this way or that way, or I'm only beautiful because of you. Okay, but this is something that would be very common in Iranian culture. If somebody pays you a compliment, to somehow turn it around and make it a compliment about them. Okay, our second example with shekaste nafsi might manifest itself in a speech act where somebody is responding to a compliment on the taste of food. And according to their cultural conceptualizations, this would result in a pragmeme, which dictates that the person receiving the compliment should apologize. So somebody tells them that their food is good, and automatically in their minds, they think, oh, okay, I must apologize to this person. So it results in practice such as, I am sorry, I know it does not taste good, or it is not worth your while. My apologies, if it does not taste good. Okay, so again, this is something that can seem strange to those of us from Western cultures. If we receive a compliment on some food that we made, most of us wouldn't instinctively want to apologize to the person. We might say something like, "Oh, I can give you the recipe," or "It wasn't that hard to make," or "I'm glad you're enjoying it." But we definitely wouldn't apologize or say that the person, that our guest, or that the food is not worthy of our guest, that what we have served them is not worthy of them. Okay, then our second pragmatic schema with Iranian is sharmandegi, which, as I said, is associated with their conceptualization of shame. And it underlies such speech acts as expressing gratitude, offering goods and services, requesting goods and services, making apologies, and formulating refusals and accepting offers. Okay, so this brings us to an interesting true story, something that happened in Australia. So there was a white Australian man who lived next door to an Iranian immigrant woman named Roya. And for many months, Mr. Anderson would mow the front part of Roya's lawn whenever he went out to mow his own lawn, just to be helpful. And after a while, one day when Roya meets Mr. Anderson, she tells him, "You always make me ashamed by mowing my lawn." So to her, this makes perfect sense because it comes from her cultural conceptualization associated with sharmandegi, which dictates that if you want to express gratitude, you frame it in this schema of shame, and the other person understands exactly what you mean. But as you may have guessed, when she told this to Mr. Anderson, he was deeply troubled, and he never again tried to mow her lawn. Why? Well, because of a mismatch of these conceptualizations. So different understandings of this pragmatic schema of shame. So for Roya to express her gratitude this way was perfectly normal, but for Mr. Anderson to think that he was causing somebody shame was an unpleasant feeling for him. He didn't want to bring up any unpleasant feelings within her. So when she expressed herself that way, he decided to stop mowing her lawn, something which could have been very incomprehensible for her, since she had expressed herself in a way that was customary with her culture. So the Persian concept of shame associated with gratitude is meant to convey the speaker's awareness of inconvenience caused. So when she was saying that he made her feel ashamed, what she was really saying is, I'm aware of the fact, or I'm conscious of the fact that you are doing something for me, which is great trouble for you, which causes you a great deal of extra trouble. So when she said, "It makes me ashamed," these were the things that came to her mind, and it was a way of saying, I really appreciate what you're doing. I'm very grateful for it. Okay, all right, another example with Sharmandegi. Um, so, about expressing gratitude. Moving on, that's the same thing. Okay, here it is. Another example with Sharmandegi. It can be used in the context of making a request. And in this case, the practice might be something like, I am ashamed, may I ask you to help me? Or with utmost shame, I need to ask you to do something for me. So the same idea of expressing shame, but this time instead of expressing gratitude, the person is making a request, so asking for a favor. So the Iranian conceptualization of shame can also be used in this context. Okay, the third example from Iranian culture, the schema of Rudar Bayesti, which, as I said, is associated with respect for authority, with respectful distance. So it might be used in such contexts where one is receiving an offer of food, and in that case, it dictates the pragmeme that the offer is not to be rejected, even if you don't like the offer or don't need it. So this could result in such practice as, I am really full, but I don't want to reject your kind offer, so I accept it. So this particular schema encourages the speaker to refrain somehow from refusing particular offers. Okay, and then our final example from Iranian is the pragmatic schema of Tauruf. And this has been called a verbal dance that circles around respect. And it encourages the receiver of an offer to accept only after several refusals. So, for example, in the event where somebody is offered some goods, some fruit, or some pastry, it dictates the pragmeme that they must insist on the offer for several turns. So if somebody's offering the food, if the person they're offering to refuses it at first, according to this schema, you are required to offer it again several times. And this might result in such practice as, have some of my food, please let me give you half of my sandwich. So according to this pragmeme, when your first offer is refused, then you keep putting a little spin on it, a different variation, offering it again in a different way, until you finally get the other person to accept. And then on the receiving end, conversely, this results in a pragmeme for the person being offered the food to reject an offer several times before possibly engaging in a final acceptance. So this might result in such practice as, thanks so much, but I had some before coming here. So, so they are supposed to refuse several times, but then finally accept. All right. Another instantiation of the schema of Taurov, is when a speaker receives a compliment on an item in his or her possession and then offers the object of the compliment to the complimenter. So this sounds like a pretty good deal in Iranian culture. If you need something, you just go over to your friend's house, you tell them how great their laptop is, for example, and then according to this schema, they are supposed to give it to you. So in such an event, when you're responding to a compliment on an item in your possession, this dictates the pragmeme of offering the object to the complimenter, and thus such pract as, "It is not worthy of you, but please take it. Please take it as a keepsake from me." So it's a pretty good deal for the person who gives the compliment. Not only do they get something new, but they themselves receive a compliment. So even when they're giving it to the other person, the pragmeme dictates that they say, well, this object is really not good enough for you, but here it is. I insist that you take it as a remembrance of me. Okay. All right, and then final instantiation of Taurov is in the event where people are saying goodbye, taking leave of one another. And this dictates the pragmeme that one must offer invitations as part of leave taking. So this might result in such practice as, "Visit us with your family for dinner sometime," or "You would make us very happy if you visited us sometime." Okay, so as we have seen, a single pragmatic schema may underpin a number of speech acts. So each of these schemas can be instantiated in a lot of different events or situations or contexts. Okay, so now we're going to look at a couple of examples from Hungarian, one example from Hungarian and one example from American English. So the example that we're going to look at from Hungarian is the phrase "ne haragudj" or "ne haragudjon." So this phrase is associated with many different feelings and conceptualizations for Hungarians, which might not necessarily come naturally to non-native Hungarian speakers. Okay, so for example, this is mostly used in speech acts where somebody is apologizing or trying to excuse themselves somehow. And one of the pragmemes that this dictates is politely bowing out of something you don't want to participate in. Right? If you don't want to go somewhere, but you don't really have a good reason not to go there, then you can always use "ne haragudj." And this is something that doesn't necessarily translate well into English or even into other languages. So you wouldn't say in English, "Don't be mad, but I'm not going tomorrow night." Don't be mad, but I can't go with you tomorrow night. Okay, but obviously in Hungarian, such a phrase is perfectly normal. Ne haragudj, holnap este nem tudok menni. Okay, and then one other example. It also dictates the pragmeme of letting somebody know you've done something they will not be happy about. Okay? Right? So, for example, if you have to break some really bad news to somebody about something that you have done, then you can say ne haragudj, de sajnos eltörtem a képernyődet. Okay, so this is a very Hungarian schema, and when Hungarians hear this phrase, then it conjures up a lot of associated feelings and conceptualizations. All right, let's look at the example from American English, and that is the phrase or the pragmatic schema of my bad. Okay, so in the speech act where you are responding to someone's discovery of your guilt, you might use this phrase, this schema, and in this case, it dictates the pragmeme. It's a way of nonchalantly acknowledging that you did it, in fact, while at the same time minimizing the gravity, the seriousness of the action. Okay, so for example, if you are talking to a friend and her mom called yesterday, but you forgot to tell her about it, you could say, yeah, I forgot to tell you she called yesterday. My bad. So on the one hand, you're saying that, yes, I did that, it's true, and I'm sorry, but on the other hand, it's not such a big deal, right? My bad. Okay? All right. And then one other example, one other instantiation with my bad. So in the speech act, where you are responding to a missed opportunity or a mistake in a game, this dictates the pragmeme of a way of accepting responsibility and thereby seeming a little bit heroic. Okay, so for example, at the end of the game, if you are talking about your loss with your teammates and you want to acknowledge that maybe it was partially your fault, then you could say something like, I should have passed you the ball more quickly, my bad. Okay, so again, it's a way of saying that, yeah, I could have done better, and I'm admitting that right now, and by admitting it, I'm seeming a bit cool or heroic because I'm willing to acknowledge what I did wrong. Okay, so I should have passed you the ball more quickly, my bad. All right, so in both of these cases, my bad, while on the one hand it is an acknowledgement that you did something wrong, it's also a way of kind of minimizing the seriousness of what you have done. And obviously it's something that doesn't really translate into Hungarian. So you can't say in Hungarian, az én rosszam. So it's a schema that's very specific to American English. All right, so I hope this has helped you to see that a thorough understanding of Pragmatics requires an equally thorough understanding of the cultural schemas and speech acts or events underpinning the pragmemes that are being instantiated. Right? Just like we saw in the example with Mr. Anderson and Roya, because Mr. Anderson didn't know about the cultural background, the cultural conceptualization, the pragmatic schema of Charmander, when Roya said that he was making her feel ashamed, he completely misunderstood it. He didn't understand that she was just trying to express her gratitude. Okay, so it's very important to understand the cultural schemas, the cultural conceptualizations in the background of these pragmatic schemas, these ways of speaking. Okay, so since pragmatic schemas are by definition conceptual in nature and prax are essentially linguistic, the hierarchical relationship is conceptual at one end and linguistic at the other. So as I said at the beginning of the lecture, practs are the most concrete and practical manifestation of these cultural conceptualizations, these cultural schemas, which lie at the root in the background. Okay, so that's all I wanted to communicate to you today, and I will post some homework for you on Edmodo, and I'll see you next time. I hope you can find plenty of ways to entertain yourselves while we're stuck at home. All right, goodbye.